The great hall of Lady Eleanor's manor was a whirlwind of medieval preparation servants laden with ale and linen, the courtyard heavy with the scent of roasting meat. In this ordered chaos, Emma, 20 years old, daughter of Lady Eleanor, 48, moved with a dangerous, restless energy. Though dressed in a humble, rough-spun brown gown, her hazel eyes glittered with a defiance born of boredom and desire. Her focus was not on her duties, but on the locked chest in her mother's chamber, home to the famed garnet necklaces and sapphire rings treasures she longed to wear. That afternoon, when Lady Eleanor was distracted, Emma crept up the stone stairs. She lifted the lid, succumbed to the intoxicating thrill of the finery, and in a moment of childish folly stole the jewels, hiding them behind a loose hearthstone in her chamber. Lady Eleanor, dressed in deep green velvet, discovered the theft instantly. Her first, chilling act was to summon her daughter, not for a discussion, but for a journey down the cold, damp stone stairwell to the dungeon below ***, the manor of Lady Eleanor, 48 years old. A formidable presence in the Shire was a hub of ancient, unyielding order. Lady Eleanor expected her daughter, Emma, 20 years old, despite her lineage, to participate actively in the household preparations for the forthcoming feast. Emma, though dressed in a practical rough-spun brown gown and white apron, carried the unmistakable air of the restless noblewoman. Her dark hair was bound in a thick braid, but her hazel eyes betrayed a deep-seated longing for a life. Beyond sweeping floors and polishing pewter dot, the source of her immediate desire was the family's famed jewels. Necklaces strung with polished garnets, rings inlaid with sapphires, and a delicate silver circlet, each piece representing power and beauty. Emma, 20, often found herself staring at the jewels, wishing to feel such finery against her own skin, a stark contrast to the rough wool of her gown. That afternoon, Lady Eleanor, 48, descended to the vast kitchens to oversee the crucial meat roasting, leaving the upper chambers unguarded. This was Emma's chance. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she crept up the stone stairway to her mother's chamber. The wooden chest, heavy and intricately carved with roses, stood against the far wall. Emma's fingers, accustomed to the coarse fabric of her duties, shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, among folded silks and embroidered pouches, the treasures gleamed. Emma gasped softly, then bit her lip to stifle the sound. She lifted the garnet necklace first, slipping it around her throat. It rested warmly against her skin, glittering even in the dim light from the narrow window. She slipped a sapphire ring onto her finger, admiring her reflection in the small, polished bronze mirror. The thrill of wearing them was intoxicating, a powerful rush of belonging to a world she felt excluded from. She laughed softly to herself, deciding she would keep them a little while, just for her secret pleasure. Before returning them, the hiding spot was desperate, but seemingly safe, a loose stone in the hearth of her small chamber. She tucked the necklace and ring away, certain that in the busy preparations, no one would notice their absence. Emma, 20, did not realize how swiftly her mother, Lady Eleanor, 48, would discover the breach of trust. By evening, Lady Eleanor, a noblewoman whose authority was built on sharp observation, was dressed for the evening's inspection. She wore a gown of deep green velvet, her auburn hair bound with a golden fillet. When she opened her chest, her sharp eyes instantly registered the missing treasures. Her lips pressed into a thin, terrible line. She descended the stairs, her steps deliberate, her mind already set on the likely culprit. She found her daughter polishing a pewter plate at the far table. "Emma," she said, her voice cold and measured, "come to me." Emma froze, the cloth stilled in her hand. She turned slowly, her cheeks already pale. "Yes, mother. You know what I keep in my chest. Tell me now, without lies. Where are my jewels?" The 20-year-old girl's mouth opened, but no words came. She shook her head quickly, desperation clouding her features. I do not know. Perhaps a servant. Lady Eleanor's gaze was piercing, cutting through the weak excuse. Do not trifle with me. I see your guilt in the way you cannot meet my eyes. You are 20 years old, Emma, and you should be beyond such childish thievery. You shall learn what deceit earns in this house. Asterisk, with no more words, Lady Eleanor, 48, seized her daughter's wrist, her grip firm and unyielding, and drew her through the great hall. The servants bowed their heads, pretending not to hear the heavy tread of their mistress's slippers on the stone floor as she dragged Emma, 20, toward the lower stair. The descent into the dungeon was chilling. The torches sputtered in iron brackets, casting wavering shadows across the damp stones. The air smelled of moss and old water, the echoes of dripping water emphasizing the isolation. At the far end stood a heavy oak bench and a small table where Lady Eleanor kept the instruments of correction, slender switches, a wooden paddle, and strangely a bundle of goose feathers, tied together with leather cord. Emma, single quotes S, 20 eyes, widened as her mother pushed her down onto the bench. Lady Eleanor's velvet gown rustled as she reached for the feathers. You think deception brings pleasure? She said, her voice low but sharp. Tonight you will learn that dishonesty brings only humiliation. You will confess, and your confession will be paid for in helpless laughter. Before Emma could protest, her mother tied her wrists with rope to the back of the bench. The bonds were firm, holding her securely in place. Lady Eleanor leaned close, her eyes steady on her daughter's face. You will laugh, child, but your laughter will be no joy. It will remind you of your folly and your complete powerlessness before truth. The tickling discipline began. Lady Eleanor took the goose feathers in hand and slid them lightly beneath Emma's 20 chin, then down her neck. The girl gasped and jerked, a helpless giggle breaking from her lips. Mother, please, not this. But the noble woman ignored her pleas. She traced the feathers under her arms, across her sides, and down to the soles of her bare feet. Emma's laughter grew wild and uncontrollable. She struggled against the ropes, her thick braid falling loose, her face flushed red with effort and humiliation. Where are my jewels? Eleanor demanded, her voice carrying easily over her daughter's helpless laughter. Emma shook her head violently, trying to resist, but the relentless tickling left her powerless. Tears sprang to her eyes as the torment continued. The feathers brushed across her ribs again, and she screamed with laughter, gasping for breath, unable to form a coherent denial. Confess, her mother said, moving the feathers back to her underarms. Finally, through hiccups of uncontrollable laughter and tears, Emma, 20, cried out the truth, the words forced from her by the humiliating, relentless torment. Behind the stone in my chamber's hearth. I hid them there. Stop. I cannot bear it. Lady Eleanor, 48, stopped at once. She dropped the feathers onto the table and silently untied her daughter's wrists. Emma slumped forward, trembling, her cheeks streaked with tears, born of both laughter and profound shame. Lady Eleanor, 48, stood tall, her deep green velvet gown sweeping the floor as she turned toward the stairs. You will fetch them now, Emma, and you will remember this night each time you are tempted by what is not yours. Emma, 20, scrambled up from the cold dungeon bench, still rubbing her sore wrists. The shame of being forcibly tickled into obedience was a sharp, burning brand. She hurried directly to her chamber, pulled free the loose hearthstone, and retrieved the garnet necklace and sapphire ring. Quietly, she returned to her mother. Lady Eleanor took the jewels, her expression stern but calm. Later, in the flickering candlelight of her mother's chamber, Lady Eleanor locked the jewels safely into the chest once more. Emma, 20, stood silently, her braid undone, her simple gown wrinkled from her struggle. "Your laughter was loud enough for all the servants to hear," Lady Eleanor said. "Let it remind you of your folly. You are my daughter, and I expect better. You are 20 years old. You must guard your dignity more closely. Do not make me teach you this lesson again." Emma bowed her head. "Yes, mother." "Forgive me." Lady Eleanor regarded her for a long moment, then blew out the candle. The chamber fell into darkness, and the only sound was the faint rattle of the lock as the jewels were sealed away. Once more got Emma, 20, cheeks still burning, knew she would not soon forget the humiliation of being tickled into obedience by her mother in the cold dungeon below. The lesson, though unusual and intensely vulnerable, had been delivered with absolute clarity. In Lady Eleanor's manner, deceit was corrected with a sharp, unforgettable loss of control. The price of thievery and lying was the stripping of dignity, a lesson far more binding than any rope. Engaging ending questions. In this adult-focused historical setting, do you view tickling as a more effective corrective discipline for deceit and humiliation than traditional methods like the paddle or switches? Why or why not? How might Emma's 20 relationship with her mother, Lady Eleanor, 48, change now that she knows her mother possesses the ability to strip her dignity so utterly, even as an adult?